Okay, let's start with a single, deeply unsettling image, and this is taken directly from the source material we've been analyzing. Imagine a woman, a princess, captured after a massive siege. Her father, a rival king, has just seen his revolt crushed by the Neo-Assyrian Empire. And they decide that death is, well, it's just too simple, too quick. Instead, they bring in their finest medical professionals.
Right. We're talking about surgeons who actually understood bone structure healing, trauma management.
Exactly. And they perform a single, calculated procedure. They deliberately break the bridge of her nose.
And then set it incorrectly.
Yes.
Set it incorrectly.
And this is the key part. It wasn't shattered, in some fit of rage on the battlefield. It was surgically altered. The sources are so precise on this.
Meticulously.
Meticulously allowed to heal. The break was clean. Healing was monitored. They even applied medication. All of it was done so that her facial structure was just fundamentally visibly changed.
Making her unrecognizable.
Completely unrecognizable to anyone who knew her. She became a living, breathing testament to the failure of resistance. And what's so crucial for you to understand is that this wasn't random brutality. This wasn't soldiers running wild.
Oh, no.
This was codified administrative policy, a procedure that was meticulously documented on clay tablets.
Recorded by scribes. It was a line item in the budget of terror.
We are talking about the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which was dominant in Mesopotamia between, roughly 911 and 609 BCE.
And they didn't just conquer, that's the common misconception. They formalized the manufacture of terror.
They approached it with the chilling precision of a religious doctrine.
That really is the key distinction. The Assyrians took conquest, which is a military act, and they turned it into a bureaucratic system.
A system.
They understood that just, taking over land wasn't enough. You have to manage the populations inside that land.
And manage them efficiently.
And what's the cheapest, most effective method of population management? It's sophisticated, internalized fear.
So our mission in this deep dive has been to unpack this immense stack of source material we have. We've got the translated royal annals, the horrifyingly clinical palace reliefs.
The fragments of resistance testimony, which are just...
And 8 administrative documents from the Calhoun archives. We're really here to understand how the Assyrians targeted women of consequence.
Women whose very identity held symbolic power.
To create what one Assyrian scribe chillingly called living documents of imperial power.
And if you look at the philosophical core of this whole system, you find this central, almost cynical discovery the Assyrians made.
Which is what?
They realized that death for your enemy provides closure.
Right. A martyr gives the conquered people a rallying cry.
Exactly. But true, enduring terror, in their view, is the complete opposite of that. It's suffering that stretches endlessly forward.
It's a life transformed into a permanent, visible reminder that resistance is not only futile,
but that your very existence can be redefined by the empire.
That makes so much sense. It's not about vengeance, is it? It's about establishing this perpetual state of psychological exhaustion in everyone else.
That's it.
But who specifically was this engineered horror for? It wasn't just random violence against everyone.
No, the targets were surgically precise. And this is where you see the Assyrian administrative genius, for lack of a better word. They targeted women who held symbolic power. Princesses, queens, the daughters of rival kings.
So not necessarily women with military power.
Not at all, but women whose very existence symbolized an alternative bloodline. An alternative center of legitimacy.
A potential focus for a future revolt.
Exactly. So they were punished not for anything they did,
but for who they were, for the inherent symbolic threat of their identity.
They were breathing symbols of a potential uprising, and the Assyrians sought to permanently erase that symbolism, but, and this is key, while keeping the body alive and functional.
Turning that body into a medium for the empire's message.
A message that could be read by every foreign dignitary and every newly conquered province. And that required a level of sophisticated, controlled, and just relentless degradation that, well, it's surpassed anything seen before in the ancient world. To really get inside the methodology, we have to look deep into the specific language, the palace records.
The administrative jargon.
Yes,
Yeah.
Exactly. In the translated documents from Sargon II's reign, you find this pervasive, defining phrase. It translates roughly as unbeing.
Unbeing.
It was the official bureaucratic process of systematically stripping a person of every single element that made them recognizable.
That is profoundly dark. Because it's not just about making them suffer. It's about fundamentally invalidating their entire personal history, their family, their identity.
Annihilating it.
Let's look at the foundational case study that the sources give us. The story of Eleni, the woman who became that living document.
Right, Eleni. She was born into the royal house of Elam. And Elam, as you know, was this massive rival power to Assyria.
They were constantly challenging them for dominance in the region.
Constantly. So when her father's revolt failed, and it failed spectacularly, she was surrendered to the Assyrians as a key part of the peace settlement.
Symbolic offering.
An offering of immense symbolic weight. And the source material is very, very clear on this point. She was not handed over to become a conventional slave.
She wasn't going to be doing domestic labor?
No. She was intended to be a public, permanent, and very visible warning.
In the process, this unbeing, it began with the calculated erasure of her status markers.
It's fascinating, though, that the sources emphasize the delicacy of the process, not the brutality.
Right. In Mesopotamian society, things like specific gold jewelry, precise hair arrangements, certain colors of cloth, these were instant indicators of power and rank.
And the removal was ritualistic. That's the key to the psychological attack.
Yeah.
Her royal jewels were taken one by one over a period of 3 months.
3 months.
And this wasn't done by a common jailer. It was overseen by priests.
Priests who were at the same time reciting prayers to the goddess Ishtar for Eleni's continued health.
Her health and longevity.
Wait, I have to stop you there. Why Ishtar? She's a goddess of war, yes, but also love and fertility. Why would you invoke a deity associated with health?
Yeah.
During an act of symbolic stripping?
That's where the administrative sophistication comes in. The Assyrians needed her healthy.
Of course.
They weren't performing a sacrifice, they were performing a political transformation. They needed her body to be robust, resistant to disease, vital enough to survive the complete overhaul they had planned.
So, the prayers to Ishtar were a state-sanctioned acknowledgement that her body was now
State property, and its maintenance was a religious and bureaucratic necessity.
And the same methodical degradation applied to her hair. It wasn't just shorn once, which would have been, a moment of high drama.
It was done weekly, routinely,
Yeah.
by the same assigned barber.
And that routine, that's the real psychological weapon, isn't it?
It is the core of it. If a trauma happens once, your mind can fight it. You can compartmentalize it.
But if it happens every week, predictably, by the same person,
it becomes a constant, almost clinical presence in your life. The mind slowly, inevitably, accepts it as the new, inescapable reality.
it stops being trauma and it becomes a law of nature.
That's the phrase from the texts. And that forced acceptance, the breaking of the will to even resist the routine for the Assyrians, that was a victory more profound than any battlefield conquest.
So once that psychological groundwork was laid, then we get to what the records call the physical reassembly.
And this is where the clinical professionalism of the Assyrian state is just on full display.
We are talking about expert, trained medical professionals.
This wasn't some drunken battlefield medicine. The sources we've read, particularly the tablets in the Calhoun archives, which are administrative records, not just royal propaganda, they confirm the use of specialized surgeons.
For the procedure on Eleni's face.
The nose bridge was deliberately fractured, then set incorrectly, so it would heal at that visible jarring angle.
I want to focus on the technical details here because they are so telling. What do the sources say about how they ensured this was a so-called clean break?
The records suggest a really advanced understanding of anatomy and trauma management. They used specialized bronze tools designed for precision cutting and manipulation, not blunt force.
And crucially, the healing process was intensely monitored.
Intensely. They applied antibiotics derived from specific plants and herbs. The Assyrians had a very sophisticated pharmacopoeia.
All to prevent secondary infections.
Because they had to ensure her complete survival and recovery. The final healed face was the message.
They engineered a visual anomaly designed to look almost like a natural disfigurement.
Adding that layer of psychological ambiguity. Yes, they weren't just leaving a scar, they were creating a permanent, recognizable signature of her failure.
And then once the bone healed, they made the message permanent on her skin, tattooing.
And this wasn't tribal or decorative marking, it was chillingly administrative.
Describe the process. What do the sources say?
The skin around her eyes, a highly visible, highly personal area, was marked with administrative symbols.
Symbols that didn't denote a crime, but a status.
Exactly. The status of one who had resisted and now belonged, irreversibly, to a fallen house. The ink was made from finely ground plant ash and mineral pigments to ensure it was permanent.
So every time Eleni saw her own reflection,
She wasn't seeing her royal self. She was reading the empire's biography written directly into her flesh.
and she wasn't hidden away, she was kept alive, fed, bathed, and housed in high-traffic rooms right next to the throne room.
It wasn't accommodation. It was permanent, high-level exhibition.
She was the ultimate visual aid for imperial diplomacy.
The sources mentioned it again and again. Ambassadors from vassal states, foreign courts, they were explicitly escorted past her chambers.
So they didn't need to be told, if you rebel, we will kill you.
The image of Eleni, the once proud Elamite princess, now permanently marked and altered, conveyed a much deeper message. It said, "We possess the power not just to destroy your life, but to redefine what your existence means."
That perfectly encapsulates the concept from historian Mario Liverani that you mentioned earlier, the weaponization of the body.
Yes.
How did he frame this body as a diplomatic instrument?
Liverani argued that the Assyrians leveraged the body as a kind of non-verbal text in political negotiations.
So not an instrument of war like a soldier.
No, a highly sophisticated instrument of diplomatic leverage. Every alteration, from the surgically healed fracture to the administrative tattoo, it functioned as a paragraph in a larger official document being presented to these foreign courts.
It declared, unequivocally,
This is what rebellion looks like. We have the power to dismantle a royal identity and create a new, degraded one, and we will keep the original alive solely to ensure the message lasts. It was political signaling through a visceral, human medium.
So if Eleni's case shows us this systematic reconfiguration of one person for maximum impact, the conquest of Susa in 642 BCE by King Ashurbanipal, well, that illustrates how it was applied to a group.
The 4 captured daughters of King Tumen.
4 sisters.
And their only crime, as the sources emphasize, was simply existing as symbols of Elamite legitimacy. They were the physical embodiment of the bloodline that challenged Assyria.
And the bureaucracy's task was to dismantle that embodiment completely.
The initial step in their dissolution, their unbeing, targeted their most fundamental identifier.
Their names.
Their names. They were immediately stripped of their birth names and issued new ones, administratively neutral designations.
Like numbers.
Often numerical or just purely functional titles, things that meant nothing in terms of personal history. And this is just a brilliant, chilling psychological strategy.
Because our sense of self is so tied to our name.
Deeply linguistic. Modern identity theory confirms it. When your name, the sound that anchors your entire self-concept, is removed and replaced by a designation that signifies property, your consciousness fragments.
You stop getting that linguistic confirmation from the outside world that you are you.
And to accelerate that fragmentation, they actively prevented the sisters from confirming their shared reality to each other.
They were housed separately.
In 4 different sections of the vast palace complex, the objective wasn't security, it was strategic isolation.
Because if one sister can't confirm a shared memory with the others,
If they can't talk about their childhood, their family, their shared experiences.
the collective identity attenuates, the bombs break apart.
Exactly. Without that external confirmation, memory becomes suspect. The goal was for each woman to eventually doubt the truth of her own past, leaving only the Assyrian-imposed present.
The next stage is described in the records as the reconfiguration of form.
Carried out over 6 months by that same mix of specialists, surgeons, tattoo artists, even the craftsmen who usually worked on monuments and reliefs.
A systematic visual unmaking. Let's start with the hair.
The hair was entirely removed, but that wasn't enough. They used a caustic salve meticulously applied that prevented it from ever growing back.
Scarring the scalp permanently.
Yes. And you have to understand, in Mesopotamian culture, a woman's hair was a primary identifier. It indicated rank, marital status, social position. You could recognize someone from a distance by their hair.
So the Assyrians ensured these women would never be recognized in that fundamental way again.
They were visually dissolved into something generic and marked.
And the tattoos applied to the daughters of Tumen. They went beyond the administrative symbols used on Eleni.
Oh, they were visceral. The markings were applied to their shoulders and their backs.
Patterns that were typically reserved for
Livestock, property identification marks used on cattle and sheep within the Assyrian administrative system.
So the message was unambiguous.
Instantly legible across cultures. You have been recategorized from royal humans to fungible property, owned entirely by the empire.
Then there's the detail of the foot binding. It sounds like a practice borrowed from elsewhere, but the Assyrians, they refined it for their own political purpose.
It was a modification. Standard crippling methods would have made them useless as mobile exhibits. The Assyrian method was different.
How so?
It was designed to introduce chronic low-level pain into every single step they took. It wasn't about preventing movement, it was about weaponizing the movement itself.
So pain became the baseline condition of their existence,
Exactly. The pain was constant, never intense enough to cause immediate collapse, but pervasive enough to ensure perpetual discomfort.
which transforms your perception of reality.
Completely. Any brief moment without pain isn't the natural state of being. It's a temporary, fragile absence of the usual horror.
Their entire physical reality was shaped by the empire's will.
At the surviving palace reliefs, which, as you said, we now see as anatomical documentation, not just art, they capture the resulting psychological state.
They show these women standing with absolute stillness.
The artists carving the stone captured the complete absence of expression. The blank features, the frozen posture.
Because they had learned a critical survival lesson.
Movement attracts attention, and attention brings pain. The stillness, the blank expression. It wasn't submission, it was a sophisticated, learned survival strategy.
A way to become invisible while still being exhibited.
The empire demanded their presence, but their bodies communicated their absence. So if those first two cases illustrate individual and collective control, the third form of punishment was, well, it was the ultimate form. It was reserved for women who maintained absolute, defiant loyalty to a fallen family.
Women who refused to accept the permanence of Assyrian authority.
The records call this process the 1,000-day dissolution.
The specificity of that number, 1,000 days, it immediately tells you this wasn't spontaneous rage. This was a pre-designed, documented, scheduled, bureaucratic procedure.
It was a legal, formalized sentence. And it begins, of course, with a public ceremony.
Designed for maximum political impact.
The woman was brought to a central square, preferably near her homeland, so the news would spread quickly. She was displayed without clothing.
And again, the sources are clear. This was for the erasure of dignity and status, not sexual violation.
Correct. Her status as a person of consequence was systematically dismantled in front of witnesses.
And the physical erasure of her past must have been just devastating to watch.
It was a bureaucratic auto-da-fe. Scribes would read her royal titles aloud, Princess of X, Daughter of Y, and then, with chisels and scraping tools, they would physically erase those titles from official stone records as the crowds watched.
So the destruction of her written status was witnessed and archived by the same administration that sentenced her.
The message being, your existence is being undone by the written word of the empire.
And then came the sustained suffering over those 1,000 days, rotating through 3 administrative tasks. Let's start with the first one.
Cleaning the palace latrines. This meant crawling into tight, claustrophobic spaces beneath the floors where human waste accumulated. She was given only a wooden scraper.
The sources emphasized the perpetual penetrating odor.
As an explicit form of chemical and sensory torture, this wasn't about productivity. It was about degrading her through constant, inescapable contact with the lowest form of human waste, the complete inversion of her royal life.
The second task was physically destructive, working the tanning vats.
The process itself is chemically brutal. Tanning hives required highly caustic materials, specifically human urine and lime, to strip the hides.
So her hands, from heavy manual labor, would inevitably get cuts and wounds.
And the caustic lime and ammonia in the vats would enter those open wounds, causing intense, searing pain and tissue damage. The records note that her fingernails would often be lost, yet she was required to continue working with bleeding, caustic burned hands.
Because stopping meant immediate retribution.
And this detail really highlights the goal, maintaining functional suffering.
Right. They needed her mobile. They needed her to complete the tasks. They weren't aiming for incapacitation.
They were aiming for the maximum possible discomfort during the maximum necessary output. The pain had to be constant, reliable, and integrated into her daily labor.
And the third task provided the maximum public humiliation.
Tending fields and spreading the human waste she had collected from the latrines as fertilizer.
This was meticulously calibrated for humiliation.
She performed this in full public view, and she was intentionally dressed in rough clothes dyed with cheap, coarse colors that were specifically chosen to resemble the expensive royal purple she would have once worn.
The resemblance was key.
Everyone looking at her was meant to understand that this person, performing this degraded function, used to be royalty, a visible comparison of before and after.
And the sources then detail the medical maintenance protocols during these 1,000 days. This is where the administrative cruelty becomes a true technology.
They ensured suffering, but they wouldn't let the functional vehicle of that suffering fail.
The diet, for example.
Calculated for discomfort, not nutrition. She was given barley bread mixed with chaff, the husks of the grain.
Which is difficult to digest and painful to swallow.
It causes microabrasions in the esophagus, water was drawn from animal troughs, and critically, salt was added to her food in amounts calibrated to maintain chronic, low-level dehydration.
Just enough to cause constant thirst and physiological stress, but not enough to kill her.
So every bite, every drink, every movement, it all became a tool of control.
And the detail about her reproductive capacity is just horrifying.
The records are explicit. If she became pregnant, which could potentially remove her from functional suffering,
Abortion herbs were administered, and duty immediately resumed.
her body was required to be a robust functional machine for pain. Nothing else. The empire would allow no other purpose for her existence during those 1,000 days.
So after 1,000 days, that's almost 3 years of this calculated torment, what happens on the 1,001st day?
She's released, not freed, but discharged, like administrative waste.
They give her back her name.
Officially, yes. And they provide her with worthless documents confirming her former status, along with provisions for 1 month. But the Babylonian accounts, written later, they paint a devastating picture of the aftermath.
She's a ghost while still alive.
Fundamentally and irrevocably altered. Her body carried a lingering smell from the latrines and the vats, impossible to wash away. Her hands were permanently disfigured and chemically damaged. Her skin was discolored, scarred.
The Assyrians had made her functionally unreintegratable.
No city, no family would accept her. Her survival was irrelevant because the world she was released into had been reconfigured to reject her existence. The Assyrian victory was in ensuring her continued life meant perpetual social death.
And this is where the Assyrian system really distinguishes itself from other historical brutalities. It's not just the cruelty, it's a documentation.
They didn't just inflict this horror, they archived it. They made it repeatable and transmissible.
They kept meticulous, detailed records maintained by the central bureaucracy, the very archives we've been using.
This wasn't just record-keeping, it was the creation of a sophisticated administrative manual, a how-to guide for managing conquered populations through fear targeted at the mind and the social fabric.
This institutional knowledge was considered critical for the future of the empire.
The tablet you cited earlier, from Sargon II's reign, describing the face reconstruction in that clinical, professional language.
It wasn't a warning, it was a medical case report.
Exactly, and the engineering aspect is so subtle but devastating. The procedure was designed to look like it healed incorrectly naturally.
That ambiguity is the final psychological blow.
Because the observer is left to wonder, was this suffering the result of a deliberate, cold administrative decision? Or was it just bad luck? The uncertainty itself becomes infectious. It prevents people from placing blame entirely on the oppressor.
And as we know from the sources, this methodology, it didn't die with the Assyrian Empire.
Not at all. When the Babylonians overthrew Nineveh, they didn't just burn the city, they studied the archives. They assimilated these methods of psychological control.
And later empires.
The Persians, the Romans, they all borrowed and adapted these principles. The idea that punishment must be prolonged, highly visible, systematic, and designed to produce a functional living warning. The Assyrians were the architects of a contagion of psychological control that persisted across millennia. And the fall of Nineveh in 612 BCE, that resulted in just immense chaos. The capital was sacked, palaces destroyed, and in the confusion, these captive women either escaped or were simply abandoned.
The official Assyrian archive, the record of their cruelty, it ends right there. But that's not the full historical truth.
No, and this is where the archaeology shifts focus. The discoveries in the ruins of the palace complex, small, crude clay tablets,
Often written in Aramaic, a non-official language.
and found scattered in crevices under rubble, clearly written by untrained hands. These are the hidden voices.
These fragments, argues the historian Stephanie Deli, they represent a profound form of existential resistance.
They weren't political manifestos. They weren't escape plans. They were personal, visceral testimonies. The absolute defiant refusal of these women to be dissolved into unbeing.
They were determined to leave a witness to their own existence.
We have those direct translations, and they are like these tiny acts of defiance sent across 2,700 years.
There's that haunting quote.
They call me nobody or property or number X, but I was here, I existed, I will leave this mark.
And another, detailing the isolation. My sisters were taken into separate rooms. I never saw them again, but I remember the song we sang.
They were using the act of writing, however crude, to assert their reality. They were defying the empire's attempt to isolate and eradicate memory.
They were creating witnesses to their inner world.
And the resistance went beyond just recording their suffering. They actively subverted the language and the symbols of their oppression.
They reframed the physical symbols imposed on them, the scars, the administrative tattoos.
The visible disfigurements that the Assyrians intended as marks of slavery and shame, these women repurposed them. They became battle wounds, badges of survival, evidence of endurance.
The most powerful example is the woman who wrote about her hands.
Yes, she wrote, "They broke my hands. They made them unfit for a royal touch. Now I write with my broken hands. Let that be a record of what I survived."
She claims agency over the very instrument of her suffering.
The broken, disfigured hands become not a symbol of defeat, but the signature of her refusal to disappear, evidence of her ability to create testimony even from complete degradation.
And the physical record confirms these procedures were carried out with that clinical precision we've been talking about.
The skeletal remains analyzed near Calhoun showed precise surgical fractures healed in specific ways. The bones had clearly been broken and then reset under medical supervision.
And this reevaluation extends to the palace reliefs themselves. For decades, art historians saw them as just generalized propaganda.
But now, with the detailed administrative records as context, we understand they are anatomically accurate documentation.
The artists were memorializing the cruelty.
Showing the altered facial structures, the permanent removal of hair, the skin marks. The empire was so proud of its efficiency and terror that it carved the results into the stone walls of its own palaces.
So let's circle back to the why. Why this incredible level of psychological and surgical sophistication? They could have just executed them. It would have been cheaper and faster.
It comes down to the efficiency and the expense of control. Military force is incredibly resource-intensive and constant, indiscriminate killing that just leads to mass mobilization against you.
But fear is cheap.
And it's internally administered by the population itself.
A few visible, transformed individuals are more efficient than thousands of soldiers.
Exactly. A few women like Eleni or the daughters of two men, systematically transformed into living, breathing examples, are vastly more efficient at controlling entire populations. They are permanent, walking, unignorable warnings placed strategically in the heart of the empire.
And then there's that dark philosophical underpinning you mentioned earlier, punishing existence itself.
This is the crucial, darker element. The Assyrians operated on the logic that certain people were inherently threatening just by existing.
By carrying the wrong bloodline or symbolizing an alternative power.
If your crime is existence, then no action you take can make you safe. No level of submission guarantees safety.
Which made the psychological impact catastrophic. But also, paradoxically, you're saying it provided the key to survival for the victims.
How does that shift the narrative for a survivor?
Understanding that their crime was merely existence meant the shame was not theirs. They realized the empire was fundamentally, cosmically unjust in targeting them for who they were, not what they had done.
That's the crucial reframing, shifting from internalized guilt, I must have done something wrong, to external systemic injustice. That was the intellectual mechanism that allowed survivors to claim their resistance and eventually heal, even with their transformed bodies.
And in the face of all this systemic degradation, we find this quiet, spiritual protest, the hidden shrine discovered at ancient Ashur.
A profoundly moving discovery. A small, illegal shrine found beneath later construction, hidden away. It contained dozens of tiny, crude figurines carved from bone and stone, often showing wear patterns from being handled over and over.
Which suggests the captive women, lacking all official agency, were engaging in sympathetic magic or spiritual protest.
Creating agency and dignity for themselves through these small idols, they created a sacred space, a space where the empire's language of unbeing held no sway right in the heart of their degradation.
So if we connect this whole Assyrian methodology, the targeting of identity, the transformation into political examples, the reliance on visibility and documentation, if we connect that to the larger sweep of history,
you see the terrifying persistence of these patterns.
the foundational ideas never died.
The specific tools changed, of course. We don't see foot binding refined for chronic pain today, but the underlying logic mutated and adapted.
The idea of marking populations, denying their linguistic and historical identity,
Forcing them into labor that degrades their being, maintaining precise administrative control over their suffering. These ideas influenced and permeated subsequent imperial and state practices of control and surveillance. The Assyrians gave the world the administrative template for engineered dehumanization.
So what does this all mean for us, for you listening, as we conclude this deep dive? We've traced the system, the specific surgical and chemical horrors inflicted on women like Eleni and the daughters of Tumen. We've looked at the meticulous administrative documentation that made it all possible, and the quiet, defiant acts of resistance from those archaeological fragments. The Assyrians treated sophisticated cruelty not as a failure of civilization, but as administrative technology.
The Assyrian Empire is dust, but their foundational logic persists. That profound, dangerous belief that some people are inherently threatening simply by virtue of their existence, their bloodline, their identity, their potential, and that their systematic degradation is therefore justified and necessary for state security. Recognizing that cold, bureaucratic logic when it resurfaces in modern systems of control and visibility, well, that's our enduring intellectual obligation.
And here's the final provocative thought that the source material leaves us with. It ties this entire administrative methodology to cultural memory. The sources suggest that today, in the ruins of ancient Nineveh and Calhoun, local Bedouin stories persist. They talk about hearing voices in the wind when it blows through the rubble.
Voices not of ghosts, but of the persistent past.
Now, we might dismiss this culturally as just folklore or scientifically as the wind catching the acoustics of the ruins.
But what if we consider it a form of deep cultural memory?
If the trauma inflicted was so visible, so systematically documented, so pervasive that it embedded an indelible impression on the very geography and architecture of the place, an impression of the women's absolute refusal to disappear, then those lingering voices, those sounds in the wind, are the persistence of their testimony. We have to remember these stories not just for the academic details of the horror, but for the stark warning they provide, and to honor the women who, against the absolute will of the most terrifying empire of their age, left a mark that proves, I was here, I existed, and I will leave this mark.